Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Cullen McFader.
Hello.
Hey, and I, as always, am Clark Coffee. I haven't changed. I'm still Clark Coffee. You're still Cullen McFader. It's been a minute since we've recorded one of these, but we're still us. It's 2025. We're still us mostly. It's been a crazy couple months, but we're back again, and I feel like this will be an interesting conversation because I feel like this is different. This is a different film than I feel like any film that we've picked. At least it feels like it. I didn't pick this film because it's like one of my favorites, or I thought it was like necessarily some kind of standout film of its era. I mean, it does stand out in some ways. I'm not saying that it doesn't. We'll get to that. But I just, I don't know. It was one of those things I was thinking about. Usually a film comes to me like just, pops right into my head, boom, I want to do this one. This took me a couple weeks, I have to say. I was like, just nothing felt right. And then somewhere out of nowhere, well, not really out of nowhere. Actually, the 4K UHD release just dropped. So that kind of put it in my head, actually, if I'm honest. But still, I was like, this will be interesting. I haven't seen this film since I think its original theatrical release. I did go see this in the theater because I am that old. But yeah, I'm really interested to talk to you about this because I think it like stands out in a good way in some ways. I think in other ways it's maybe less strong. This isn't going to be like a home run hit, I don't think. Like there's, you know what I mean? It's this film is like, I know it was like really, it seems at least that people are really divided on this. You've got some people that really love it. Some people it just doesn't connect with. And especially on its release, even though I think it was like commercially pretty successful, critically it was really split. And were some interesting actors in this. The director I think is really unique. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about The Cell, man.
Do you believe there's a part of yourself you don't show anybody? When I'm inside, I get to see those things. I feel them.
These girls were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. Our killer is a white male, about 30 years old.
Carl Rudolph Starger. Squad's had the house under surveillance for about 20 minutes.
He keeps them in this thing for about 40 hours. And after 40 hours, the water starts. And it doesn't stop. There is a girl that is missing. Her name is Julia Hickson. He is the only one that knows where she is.
If he was conscious, do you think that he would tell you where she is?
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
You bring in this monster, and you're asking her to go into that mine.
Where's Julia Hickson?
No thanks.
She's gone very deep into his world.
So she's made contact.
She's lost. She thinks this is real.
I'm going in to get her.
In what world do you live in?
It's interesting that when you chose this, I was like, and it took me a minute to even remember what movie this was because I had never seen it. Actually, this was my first time watching it. But
because there's film. I think
there's a few movies called The Cell that are out. That like there was one I think later, but I knew that it was this one just because it had just had that 4K release, and so I kind of back checked on that.
Wait, are there other films that were titled The Cell? No, there's like The Cube or something. I feel like, right?
There is a Cell. There might be a Cell, just Cell without the.
There is. There's a film that's just Cell, as in cell phone, not as in like a cell, a place to hold someone.
Yes,
that was that really horrible Stephen King adaptation, right? With John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. At least as my memory serves, it was a really not good film, if I'm remembering the right one. Yeah, I feel like that was a pretty big bomb.
Yeah. But I'm curious because you said that the reason that this kind of popped up into your mind was because of the 4K release. Was that something when you saw that? Was it like hey, this is a new movie on 4K, so I'll grab it, and I remember seeing this, or was it like something that drew you to this movie that made you want to watch it again?
Yeah.
Or...
No, that's a great question, and it ties right into kind of why I picked it and what my first kind of personal experience of the film was. So, like I said, I have a memory. I definitely can remember seeing this in the theater, and and we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit more. But this film has visuals in it that are really quite striking. There's this is almost kind of like two genres, kind of merged into one almost. In this film, we basically, in a nutshell, we have a serial killer who's suffering from childhood trauma. And then on the other side, we have this social worker who's played by Jennifer Lopez. The serial killer is played by Vincent D'Onofrio. Is that how I always get that?
Is that
you pronounce it?
D'Onofrio.
Yeah. Okay. I pronounced it right. Why are you laughing at me? Don't laugh at me. It never sounds right.
I thought you had misspelled it for a moment.
No, I had to visualize it and anyway, don't laugh at me, Colin. It's not nice. It's been a while since we've recorded.
I'm laughing with you.
Feeling rusty. Okay. As long as you're laughing with me. Anyway, but just to give a little context, right? And so then we have this. There's this kind of setup where Jennifer Lopez, her character, she's a social worker, and there's this new technology that they've invented where you can go into the mind, like of a patient or a person, period, right? And in the beginning, they kind of illustrate that she's going into this mind of this child who's kind of catatonic, who's suffered from some trauma, and they're testing it out on this kid, and so she's going into these landscapes of the soul or the mind, really, just to kind of tie this into Herzog a little bit here.
Yeah,
but right, and so she's and so there's, on the one hand, you have this quote unquote real world where people are just doing their thing, living their life, whatever, and then you have this inside of the mind world, and the two radically different visual styles. So to bring it back to your question, all of the inside the mind stuff, where there's just this extraordinary production design, costuming, it's and I say this in all the best ways, it's shot like the best of the music videos of that era. And actually this director, Tarsem Singh, does have a lot of video and commercial experience. And you really see that here. So that's what really stood out in my mind. I could still remember some of the striking visuals of that part of this film, and they had kind of just burned their way into my brain. Well, and any time a film is able to do that, I feel like it's worth revisiting, right? I mean, I can still remember specific shots, specific aspects of this film, even though I hadn't seen it for 20 plus years. And but I couldn't remember much more. I had forgotten even that Jennifer Lopez and Vince Vaughn were in it. I had forgotten most of the details of the story. I could, remember kind of the gist. So I thought, okay, cool. I remember this film for the visuals. It's come out on 4K. I'll check it out. So there you have it.
Yeah,
that's why.
That's interesting. Yeah,
I had to pause there for a cough. So yeah. So I, in a certain sense, I remembered some of the visuals, but I couldn't remember much of the film. So when I sat down to watch it for this, it was, oh gosh, it was almost like watching it for the first time in some ways. But then there were some, some of those images that were burned into my brain. I mean, it was like shocking how specifically I did remember them, though, because they are so striking. And we'll get into it a little bit more. But yeah, and then the other thing too, I kind of remembered this film being so indicative in some ways of a lot of stuff that was going on in that time in the early 2000s. On the one half, you kind of have the the FBI cop procedural chasing the serial killer kind of thing, a la, California, Seven, Silence of the Lambs. You have like a lot of these different kind of films that I feel like share a certain vibe with this one. And then you also have a lot of what's going on in the commercial and especially the music video world. I mean, this is back, if you're younger, you may not remember an era when music videos for an artist could get into the $5 to $10 million range. Like they were big time business. And when people actually bought albums and these music videos pushed a lot of album sales, I mean, the videos were kind of pushing the art form and the technology of movie making in a lot of ways. And so you see a lot of that here too. So I thought, oh, this is like interestingly indicative of a lot of like trends that were happening back then. Why not revisit it? It'll be fun. So that's kind of where I was coming from whenever I caught it. Now, it's my understanding this is the first time you've ever seen the film.
Yeah. No, yeah, this was the first time.
I'm super curious to hear kind of your initial like response to it, or kind of, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I knew of Tarsem Singh. And I know I own The Fall. I've owned The Fall for pretty much around the time it came out, because my uncle was a big fan of his. And so I'm surprised that he didn't actually show me this, but I do remember him giving me The Fall, and for some reason I've just never seen it. I still have the DVD somewhere. But yeah, and so I'd never seen this. I knew, again, about the director vaguely. I knew that he'd done a lot of music videos, commercials, and things like that. He had a movie out recently, I think 2 years ago at TIFF, so he's still working, and he's got a name for himself. So, and the first thing I thought though was that this when I started watching the movie, it like filled me with this wave of nostalgia, because this is so this came out basically when this came out. This is what media and entertainment looked like when I was a kid. Whether that was commercials, whether that was music videos, whether that was movies, this very kind of like saturated, really big production design with CG that's not necessarily photorealistic and all this different stuff. And so it really kind of brought me back to that era. And so I thought that was really interesting. And like you said, that it's got this kind of like amalgamation of like all these things that were popular then, from the visuals to like the serial killer story to like it almost sort of incorporates this Matrix-y kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
And so no, I thought it was like even the technology is just so like those little keyboards that they type on in that control room are so 2000 in a sense. Like it's so. Of its time in a good way, I think, not in a dated way, but so I immediately kind of, that's really stuck out to me. The flair of the visuals is really, very unique, but also again, very much of its time. Like you can tell that this guy, Tarsem Singh, was doing a lot of commercial work, and because again, like I said, this was back when like Michael Bay would have been doing commercials, and Zack Snyder would have been doing like Budweiser commercials and things like that, and they all had this like epic feel to them, and that's really what this feels like.
And it's also
and
like
even,
pops up like the 9 Inch Nails closer video, that, and the Brothers Quay, and like the Tool Sober video. Like I feel like I just wanted to chime in and agree with you that it it is so like reminiscent of, or it's kind of from that same school, and you kind of that there are those visual themes or visual techniques and styles that really seem to run through those early 2000s. Totally agree. So it's interesting that was nostalgic even for you. Because it certainly was for me. I mean, I remember, I spent my entire childhood watching MTV. So, and now that at this point, I would have been older and I would have been, actually like living my life, but still, nonetheless, I so remember those videos just being on heavy rotation and being exposed to all that. So,
I mean, I could just see myself like it's just a movie that I could imagine being on a CRT TV in that sense, like or like when you go into Blockbuster and they had the TVs kind of up in the corners showing whatever like a new release was. I could so imagine this
the
being
VCR
on
TV combo. The VCR TV combo, like the 13-inch plastic CRT with the VHS like built in. Oh yeah.
And even down to we'll get into performances in more detail later, but even down to like I tried to explain this during our little conversation before we were recording, but this kind of way of speaking that J-Lo does in this, Jennifer Lopez, where she is there's this
J-Lo.
Kind of like it's like
was she wasn't J-Lo yet, right?
I guess she wasn't J-Lo. Yeah. Or maybe she, I don't know. Yeah, when did she become?
Maybe she was on her way. She was on her way.
Metamorphosized
she was just Jenny.
Into.
She was Jenny from the Block.
Yeah, she was still Jenny from the Block. Yeah. But getting it was almost like it hit me as this sort of, and it's something that I've noticed, more and more watching movies from this era, that there's this almost like, it's not transatlantic accent in the sense that it sounds like the transatlantic accent, but it's almost like there's this style of speaking that actors had in this very specific time from like 1995 to 2003, where there's like almost like a melodrama to it. They're heightening their performance in a sense that is, and J-Lo is doing that here, and it really, again, it brought me back to. Like,
I'm gonna have to rewatch this to see. Yeah, this didn't stand out to me. But I'm really intrigued with what you're saying here. I'm gonna have to go back and maybe just watch a scene or two and see if I can pick this up. But that's interesting. So in your mind, at least, there you feel like there is a certain like kind of way of speaking, in the same sense that there was like that, like you mentioned, this transatlantic. When did they do that? In the 50s or 40s?
Yeah, like 50s, 60s,
in Hollywood,
40s. Yeah, it kind of phased out in the 60s. Yeah,
I always think of like Katharine Hepburn or something for that accent, right? That's the epitome of that. But
and like Halle Berry kind of speaks in that in like this era too. Like she has this kind of similar way of speaking. Like it's a very interesting thing. It's very subtle, and I think that's why it's very difficult to impersonate. But it just kind of brought me back. I was like, this performance is so 2000. But no, and then it's also, I think one thing that really was interesting to me is that it's not like a procedural in the typical sense. They kind of catch the killer in the first like act of the movie. Really, it's really the climax of the first act. There's not much of a sort of like,
detective.
What is this killer's? Like it's not like they don't go through, okay, how does this killer find his victims? Like there's one scene where he does kidnap a woman, but it's not like you're seeing his kind of like mind in terms of how he operates and how he goes about his nefarious plans to kidnap and to torture or whatever. It's not really so much focusing on his strategy, but more his psychology in a sort of forensic sense, which is kind of interesting. But then it also, it takes that forensic psychology thing and brings it into this fantasy world. And so it's really, it's a fascinating movie, because it's also very fascinating because, in case I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but if it was made today, it would be done in such a different way.
You wouldn't see a film like this.
You would strip back so much of that visual flair. I think it would be something sort of like you would have, even the like the room that they go into do the mind swap thing would probably be like
the lab, like
a sensory deprivation tank or something, right? Like it wouldn't be this hyper, high tech thing with these suits that they put on and all that. So it's really interesting that it's a very much a kind of time capsule of this. So
tell me, but tell me, like, so totally picking up what you're putting down on all of that. But from purely just like a storytelling, just as an audience, you're watching the film. Just curious, like for your higher level take. Then, since first time you've seen it, were you emotionally drawn in? Did it captivate you, or were you kind of? I mean, I'm just kind of curious. It sounds like you definitely got this nostalgic vibe from the film, but was it effective as like a story in your mind for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I watched it twice. I watched it once last night, and then I watched it again this morning just to kind of get more familiar with it. And I wasn't bored. I think that is a sign of
yeah, that's pretty
intrigue
good. If
at
you're
least,
not,
that it wasn't like if you can watch something twice in a row in basically less than 24 hours, I think that, and it doesn't,
that's a good sign.
Get a little bit boring, then yeah, you're probably on the right track. I think one of the key aspects of that is that it's a very simple story.
Sure.
It deals with kind of this whole like morally gray, nature versus nurture, is like an evil person evil because of the way they were brought up, or is it psychological damage? Can you excuse these evil acts? So there is like a morally gray kind of conversation.
Or can you have empathy?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring that up. It's not something I think that I thought of consciously, but we could talk about it here now that you mention it. Because the film certainly is not going out of its way in any explicit or overt way of trying to make a statement on what you just said, which is the nature versus nurture. But I think, at least I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that it was overt in any way. But what I did feel, especially now kind of looking back in hindsight that you mentioned it, is that I think the film is definitely asking for you to empathize with the bad guy, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Definitely asking for you to do that. And that's interesting. That's not something that really popped into my mind. And maybe it's because I'm kind of already there, just as a person. Not that I would, of course, condone any of the behavior, but that I just automatically kind of have a general understanding of like how trauma can perpetuate and, how victims can victimize. And so I've kind of got a built-in empathy for that, right? But this film is definitely, you're right, it's asking for you to empathize, because we're literally the film is taking you into the mind of the killer. Yeah. And as like scary and kind of twisted and demented they are making that visually. And we can talk about some of those like specific scenes in a minute, but we're definitely being asked to, hey, look at the trauma that this kid has suffered. And of course, J-Lo, we're kind of looking through her eyes, right? There's even a point literally where she's like locked in a closet and she's literally watching these vignettes of of Vincent's character, the serial killer, as he's being tormented and abused by his father.
Yeah.
So we're literally kind of seeing that. So that's interesting. That's a really good point that you bring up. I hadn't thought of that specifically. Yeah,
and
that's exactly what the film is doing. Yeah,
it's not complicated, and I don't mean that it's like simplistic in a negative way. I mean that it's not complex. It's not trying to ask like massive moral quandary questions and make you come out like questioning the way you see the world to a degree. But I think it does do a really good job of making that moral question simple and efficient. Maybe efficiency is not the right word, but I mean, when I say efficiency, I mean more in the sense that it doesn't take you much to fall into the story.
Well, it's not didactic, or it's built into the story. It's built into the story. You don't perceive any kind of preaching or any kind of...
And each of the characters' arcs revolve around this theme too. Vincent D'Onofrio clearly is someone who, he describes in his little expository moments that he's someone who has faced sort of trauma like this, both in work, and sort of implies at one point that he faced similar trauma as a child, and so there's all these little things that it's like, all the characters, it's very much a screenplay that would kind of pass all of those checks of like, set up your characters, have this structure, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it's very effective in the way that it does that, and because of that, it's a very easy watch. Like, it's not exhausting, it's not it doesn't take too much out of you to watch it. It feels it just kind of
maybe
feels
for
like,
some
again,
people,
it
visually,
could, yeah,
it may
there is
be.
there
I
is
mean,
some disturbing stuff, and there's, you know,
I wouldn't say that this film is definitely, I wouldn't call this film a violent film, although there is some violence in it. But but this film could be disturbing to you know. There's
certainly,
it's certainly
yeah,
the film is attempting in its portrayal of, you know, the interior of these people's minds, that both the child in the beginning, who's kind of in this catatonic PTSD state, and then of course the many times we go into the mind of Vincent's character, the serial killer. I mean, certainly there is like at least attempts to be disturbing. I mean, the movie is the director is working toward creating disturbing imagery and a disturbing landscape, or a disorienting at the very least, or surreal at the very least. So, you know, I mean, there could be, you know, for you maybe this was just, you know, not even, but for some,
yeah,
and
I don't
know,
mean necessarily easy in the sense that it's like not disturbing. I mean easy in the sense that it's
the story's not
it's
convoluted.
something
Is
that
that
you
what
could,
you're
yeah,
trying?
it's
You're
not,
trying
it's
to
really
say that
easy
it's
to
not
just kind of,
convoluted.
yeah, pay attention
Yeah.
to, and to get, and to understand motivation, and to,
Well,
you know, to go in
and
that
I think
sense.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not convoluted. The movie is definitely not about plot mechanizations. This isn't, you know, this is not a film that's about, you know, like you even said, it's not even about actually trying to track down and find this killer and figure out who he is. That's done by the end of the first act. But it is, we're kind of like then the chase becomes, we've got to find out where. Now this is, we haven't talked about this part of the plot, but just in case it's been a while, friendly audience, that you've seen the film. So what happens after, like Cullen had said, we do see him kidnap in the very beginning of the film. He's already killed a woman, and we see him kind of prep her for his, you know, kind of, gosh, it's like, this is actually one of the most, like, I think, like difficult or kind of almost, you know, traumatizing parts of the movie, is that, you know, he's basically like sexually aroused by this woman that he has killed, and then like put in a bathtub of bleach, and like he has video recorded her death and her struggle, and he's being actually like sexually stimulated by this. That was maybe the most difficult part of this film for me to watch. That was not pleasant. It wasn't meant to be pleasant. It certainly wasn't. It was like really disturbing. Yeah. It's really disturbing. But then we see him very soon thereafter kidnap another woman. And so now we kind of already know, of course, because of the setup, what he's going to do with her. And basically he has put her in this plexiglass or glass cell, and the cell is slowly filling with water. And water is a theme throughout the film that we will see over and over again. And I'll be curious to hear your thoughts about kind of what you think that symbolism is, or maybe what that might mean, because I'm not quite sure I know myself, but maybe we'll kind of find it together. But the cell is slowly filling, and ultimately it's going to end up drowning her. So when they catch the serial killer, they actually find him in a catatonic state as well. When they go to raid his house, he's basically like become a vegetable, I guess, in a certain sense. He's not going to be able to speak. He's not going to be able to tell them where this woman is. She's still hidden somewhere. She's not in his house where they found him. And so
like
now
40
the film
hours
becomes
or something to get her. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And so, right. And so the everybody knows what's going to happen. The audience knows what's going to happen. The police in the film know what's going to happen. All the characters know if they don't figure out where he's put this woman, she's going to die within a certain amount of hours. So then the film becomes, okay, we have to go into his mind and we have to extract this information so we can save this woman. So that's kind of how the plot shifts. And of course, it's a nice, device to kind of keep an urgency with everything. And, so that's where we're at with things. But I wanted to bring this up. It's interesting. You talked about how, the plot is quite simple. It's not too convoluted, this kind of thing. It's interesting to note, when I was watching the film, I also watched it twice. And the second time I watched it with the director's commentary on. And the sense that I kind of got, now, there's a little bit of my interpretation here, so this could be not exactly, I don't want to speak for the director, but the sense that I got as he was describing his experience with the project and why he chose it and some other things, was that he really was focused on creating and bringing to life those, inside the mind sequences. That was really his focus. And whatever he had to do to get a chance to do that at a high budget level, he was willing to do. And so he literally says in the commentary, look, these kind of like serial killer, police movies, tracking down the serial killer stuff, I knew that was popular. And so here I had this script. And so I knew that I could kind of put this imagery, would fit in these moments in this script. And so that's why I did it. And so I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but there is a commentary by the screenwriter. But it's my understanding that, the screenwriter didn't envision any of like all of this, all of the surreal inside the mind scenes that Tarsem put into this film really weren't in the script, at least nowhere near. Yeah, at least nowhere near the way they ended up. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know, that may have something to do with it, that the script really wasn't designed from the beginning to be much more than just this, kind of like what was popular at the time, serial killer on the loose, and we've, the good guys have to chase him down, and, that we see in so many of those films. But it was a vehicle for the director to be able to create these extraordinary visual landscapes. So I don't know if that, maybe that has something to do with what you're feeling with the script. It was, he saw it as just an easy vehicle. Again, this is my interpretation, kind of just picking up pieces of what he's kind of said in the commentary. So, I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but that's my kind of take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think my biggest complaint about the movie, and I noticed this a lot more on the second viewing too, was that I think it sort of lacks that urgency, that it sets up this kind of ticking time bomb with the woman in the cell, and she's going to drown. But I think it feels very disconnected from these moments that we have at the laboratory. Like the Vince Vaughn sort of will occasionally chime up and be like, "Hey, we don't have a lot of time." But there's a lack of.
He looks at his watch. He looks at his watch and taps.
I think not that we ever like sit here and go like, "This is what I would do."
No, that's okay.
But I think what would have helped the movie would be to have kind of seen this and perhaps this would have overcomplicated it, but if we had just a little bit more of Vince Vaughn doing the police work, kind of trying to balance out, because we've got this character that's established that he doesn't sleep and that he's like kind of like he's always working, and so if you had balanced out some of this laboratory stuff with maybe them searching property by property by property in this California valley to find this woman, it's like they're coming up with nothing. And it's like, maybe Vince Vaughn and J-Lo have a little bit more tension, because he's just like, I don't even want to do this. I don't think it's going to work. We're going to do this, the old fashioned way, and we're going to find her by searching this whole valley.
I have a theory.
This house, and then
I have a theory.
Yeah.
So extrapolating from what I just told you about what the director was focused on.
Yeah.
It's possible that he was just much less interested in all that stuff, that he was not anywhere near as interested. And I'm going to draw a parallel to you. Blade Runner. Blade Runner is another film that's made by a director that I think is probably one of the best, production designers who's ever made a film. Of course, he's a director, Ridley Scott, but I think his strength really lies in production design and the visual and the worlds that he creates. Yeah. And I think Blade Runner is another film that you could say that you could level the exact same critiques of that you just did, which is, in the plot, in what's actually going on, you have it's supposed to be this cop has to track down, these escaped replicants before they, kill people or do whatever they're going to do. But there's not really like a lot of detecting going on, of course. And if you watch the different versions of the film, and if you listen to Ridley Scott's, commentary, and of course there's been books. I mean, there's been, Lord knows how much ink has been spilled in dissecting that film and its many iterations. But that was a part of the problem with that film, was that the studio is saying there's there's no detecting going on, and Ridley Scott is like, who cares? Look at the this is beautiful, and so we should put in a scene where he finds a snake scale in the bathtub, or what they're like kind of shoehorning in the plot stuff, the detecting, right? That's supposed to be, propelling the story. But Ridley Scott is really interested in everything but that. I have a sense that Tarsem is not really interested in that. And if you look at the care with which the in the mind stuff is shot versus the in the world stuff. Now, look, I know that they had to create a contrast and a distinction here. I get that. But at least in my mind, and again, I'm watching this in the best way that you could possibly watch this, apart from having a 35 millimeter print that you could project, right? I didn't get a chance to do that. Now, I saw it projected in film, I would assume in 2000, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that would have definitely been, yeah.
So, but of course, I don't have any recollection of the visual, But so theoretically, I've seen it in the best way that a person could pretty much see it today, and I was really taken aback by how flat, how gray, how visually uninteresting the film is, and how just kind of uninterested the director almost seems in all of the real world stuff.
Yeah.
And then when we get into the in the mind stuff, I see this explosion of energy and creativity. Now, maybe that's just me reading into it a bit, but that's my hypothesis.
No, and I was that's exactly kind of like what I was alluding to in that when I was saying that the plot mechanisms kind of feel less like it, that with the lack of that urgency, and I totally agree that I think that it's definitely because, and I mean, I think that we've talked numerous times on this podcast about how neither of us really, plot is like the least thing that we're really caring about. So I'm not necessarily saying this from a cinema sins like ding point. However, I think that those real world moments would have been more effective had there been a little bit more of that urgent. I mean, you think of something like Silence of the Lambs again, where it's like every single time Clarice and Electra are talking, you feel this urgency that, like, even just in the performance of Jodie Foster, that she wants to get through this as quickly as possible so that she can find this so it's victim.
Interesting,
and so it's and so I think that to quickly comment on about the visuals, I do wonder if I have an inkling that the final color grade was probably tweaked a bit on that 4K release. And the only reason I think that is because in the version that I watched, which I believe was the Blu-ray release, which is just an HD version of it, digital, the color seems like it wasn't touched much. There's not like even the I think I described it in our pre-conversation as sort of looking like a Kodak demo reel of like a new film stock. So even the real world stuff in the version that I watched is still quite saturated, whereas I wouldn't be surprised if now that the director's going back doing a new color kind of suite for this, that they sort of said like, let's bring up that contrast between the real world and the fake world more, and so they kind of maybe desaturated that real stuff, because in the one that I saw, that the colors are still quite saturated in the real world, but I totally get what you mean in terms of just the way that it's shot. It's very
I'm just talking about visual texture. I'm just talking like visual texture, blocking, movement. I mean, it's just they're like
lots talking over the shoulder.
They're just talking in like gray walls. There's like just flat. It's like the laboratory that they're in is really, quite frankly, like there's very little visual texture. It's frankly quite boring visually. Almost everywhere that we are when we're in the real world, it's maybe it does. I'm sure that's accentuated in my mind or emphasized in my mind because of the contrast of how much visual texture there is in the dream world. And so I get it. I'm sure I'm probably a little bit, the film biases you toward, kind of feeling a little bored visually when you're not in the mind world. But yeah, so I don't know. There was another little anecdotal thing that I had that might shed some light on this too. Again, it's speculation, and we're allowed to do that. And you even just said, you're like, I don't want to get into like what I would have done. No, we're allowed to get into what we would have done. We're not saying that, oh my God, like it's speculation. This is totally just cinema speculation. We're allowed to do that. We're never saying like attacking the filmmakers or saying that the film, that's not, people who listen to us, they know that's not what we're about. But we totally are allowed to speculate and imagine. which what I'm going to do now. There was, interestingly, again, so when I'm listening to the commentary, the director commentary, Tarsem's commentary, one of the things that he brought up numerous times, and that and it's not like he did this commentary, I don't think, like, the year he made the film. I think the commentary might have been made a few years afterwards, although I'm not sure. Regardless, he brought it up numerous times in the commentary, which makes me think this is something that's really important to him. So the actress who plays the second victim, who is placed in the cell that's slowly filling with water, and that's kind of like our ticking time bomb, right? Apparently, part of the casting was, look, can you swim? Are you a strong swimmer? Because you're going to be sitting in this tank full of water for, almost the entirety of your shoot days. And of course, look, like any good actor or actress, you always say yes. Can you ride a horse? Yes. Can you swim? Yes. Can you speak with a British accent? Yes. Like, you just say yes, right? Because
we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And it's like, hey, I can learn between now and then. It's like, if you need me to ride a horse, I'll learn how to ride a horse, right? And so it's, at least I have been taught, almost, unless it's like ridiculously specific, cause it's a fine line between lying and kind of, stretching the truth a little bit because you're going to go out and learn it, before you get on the day. But apparently, she was unable to perform in the water the way that the director wanted her to perform in the water. And it was a real frustration for him. And he talks about how that frustration actually kept him from being able to shoot her the way he wanted. He literally, in the commentary, talks about how he used longer lenses than he would have, that he stayed further away from her, and that he felt like that led to an obvious disconnect, that we're not nearly as sympathetic to her and her suffering in the end. And it's not as dramatic a release of like she's been saved, because he was frustrated with the actress, and that impacted how he shot her physically, like longer lenses. I stayed further away from her. And that really was an interesting, I thought that was a really interesting thing to admit and to share on the commentary. And I think it's an honest thing, and it's a good learning experience, I think, for any, aspiring filmmakers, or just filmmaker period, or artist period. It's like how much our emotions and frustrations can manifest in, and how we continue doing the work. And so I almost wonder, as an extrapolation, if anytime you're frustrated as a director, that's like taking you or pulling you away from being close enough to the subject, for being close, for being the distance it requires emotionally, I mean, so if that kept him from being emotionally close to that actress, and that affected that, I wonder what else. It's like I look at Vince Vaughn, and he also, the director talks a little bit about how, they had to kind of shape his performance in the edit with different takes, because he was being Vince Vaughn, right? And the director really wanted something a little more serious. And there was going to be kind of this backstory of a little bit of like friction between him and one of the other cops, and that didn't kind of work out. And, so he had to kind of really pick and choose these takes, not so much because necessarily maybe they were the best takes, but because they were consistent tone that was a little more serious. And I wonder if it was like, how much did the director work with Vaughn, sometimes, and again, I'm not saying this is the case, but just sometimes directors who are so focused on the visual are maybe sometimes a little, because you can't be 100% focused on everything, right? If 100% of your focus is on the visual, well, you can't also be 100% focused on the actor. Yeah. It's just not, you only have 100% of your focus. You don't have 200% of your focus. And maybe that's, it's happened to me. I know maybe it's happened to you, where you find, and maybe you catch yourself where you find yourself really getting tunnel vision on one aspect of the project, and then you realize, oh crap, I'm not giving enough attention to this other thing. So who knows? Just speculation. And I even wonder if Jennifer Lopez was cast. She was probably attached to this project by the studio, is my hunch, before Tarsem even signed on. I don't know that at all to be a fact, but I wonder. So I don't know, all these things, it's interesting to kind of think about and speculate how all of these different things might color the end result.
Yeah,
Okay,
well, I mean,
I've blabbed on long enough.
No, but I think that's interesting is the one thing that I was going to say too, just to sort of bridge these two ideas between like these visuals and performances, is that there's this interesting thing that he does in a lot of the real world sequences where he will always kind of begin it with something that's like a very visual flair, or he'll have these moments like a lot of it's shot very ordinarily, and then these
refresh my memory. Describe one.
Yes, there's three that come to my mind. One of them is the first moment that we see Vincent D'Onofrio when he's driving his truck down this like kind of central Northern California valley farm.
It's like he's in the valley. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's like Bakersfield or something. He's driving down this road, and the shot begins on this tortoise in this long grass, and then it kind of comes up and it goes by his car, and it's one of those things that's like that's a deliberate decision, That
sure. Oh, absolutely.
We're going to start on this. That we're going to start on this tortoise, and he's going to. Yeah. And then there's another moment when the police, like the FBI, are on this airfield, and the shot opens with these cars driving kind of in front of this plane, and it's shot from behind this private jet, and it kind of cranes by this private jet's engines, and like the heat wash coming out of the engine, and so it has this heat jittering effect on the whole this distortion on the whole image. And then the third one is when they are bringing Vincent D'Onofrio into the laboratory on the they land in the helicopter and they're wheeling him in. There's this woman on the bridge who is looking down at them like one of these lab assistants. Kind of, it's an outdoor bridge, and she's sort of, it's like a pedestrian bridge. She's looking down at them, and then you see in the there's a side shot, and you can see her kind of follow them, and then she runs to the other side of the bridge and looks down at them. And there's these little visual flares that he includes in these moments that kind of piqued my curiosity, because I was thinking, was this something where he thought these visuals, I want to make the real world visuals boring, but I don't want them to be too boring, so I'm going to throw these little elements in. Was it maybe that he wasn't concerned about these scenes as much because he was focused on these dream sequences, and so he sort of just thought, okay, I'm just going to throw these things in to flare them up a little bit. So it's kind of interesting, it's these little moments that really stuck out to me. That did also feel very, very, music video or commercially or something like, again, from that era, like we were talking about before, where it just is this. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to pick at that a bit for a second. I'm curious about your thoughts. So as you describe them, I kind of have these vague recollection of those moments. They didn't particularly like stand out to me, but I completely know what you're talking about. And of course, this is not any kind of specific technique to Tarsem. We see this all the time. It's kind of like a button, basically, right? It's like you've got kind of like it's not really a button that would be at the end, but it's kind of, I don't know, is there such thing as a front button? But
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, a button up.
But often, so I'm curious to, since you remember them so vividly, help me with this. So in general, I don't mind those, except that I feel like they really should ideally be tied into what's happening in the scene. So for example, from a story perspective, right? Not just a spatial. It's not just like, here's a tortoise in the grass and we pull up and now there's a truck driving down the road. It's kind of spatially it's tied together, right? Because the tortoise is on the side of the road and da-da-da. And then maybe it's like visually interesting. You need to show a truck drive down the road. That's important to show. Okay, well, how can I make this kind of more interesting? The problem I have, though, is like, what the hell does the tortoise have to do with the truck? Or more specifically, who's driving the truck? Like, what does that say? Does it say anything? It doesn't feel like that says anything about, like, there's no further imagery that ties him to a tortoise. It's not like, are they saying he's slow? Are they saying, like, so I feel like I have a problem.
I guess.
Or he has a shell, maybe. Yeah, okay.
An emotional shell.
No, I'm not saying that that's what happened here, because I don't remember those scenes as specifically as you might. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. But in general, I always kind of I'm like, it's like I get it. You got to make this kind of you have to have this connective tissue, or you kind of have to have this exposition, or you kind of have to, this needs to be there, and you're trying to find a way to put something in the foreground, or because that's another example of this same kind of thing, right? It's like, okay, we need to make the frame interesting. Oh, let's put something in the foreground, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the story, but at least there's visual depth, right? This is basically an extension of that.
Well, and I totally agree with what you mean there, and I think that what it reminded me of, and I don't mean this in a super super negative way, but it sort of reminded me of, when somebody is whether they're in film school or they're making short films and they're kind of starting out, and they get their first slider. And then from then on, every single shot in their short film is moving side to side really, really slowly. And there's always some little camera movement because they've got the slider and they have to use it.
And and you always have to have
the
it
image is not interesting enough or something, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of what, I think it's important that you brought up this idea of what does it have to do? Because you think of, again, this heat wash that I keep bringing up from those jet engines.
Right.
That scene is not there's nothing in that scene that feels, in terms of the performances and in terms of what the actual, the service of that scene to the story is not something that's weird or jarring, or, nobody's
or hot.
What are we going to do? It doesn't, or hot. Whereas you think of the same exact technique being used in something like Lawrence of Arabia, when you have Lawrence at the well, and there's that 400 millimeter lens, and the heat wash is coming up, and it's you see the rider come out, who I think is Omar Sharif's character, coming out of the Mirage, and there it's servicing the story because it's putting you in the perspective of this character who is out in this vast desert with nothing around, and it brings this idea of is this a hallucination? What's going on here? Whereas it's not like that in this. It's more of just something that is purely visual. Now, maybe Tarsem Singh would sit down and say, actually, this is what I was going for here, and this is why that visual is it's actually connecting to the character this way. But I didn't feel I didn't feel that connection when I watched it.
It didn't land.
Which is that's, if anything, the most important thing, right? And so I think that this movie is kind of filled with those things. I think that the movie on a whole works for me. I actually, enjoyed the movie, but I think that it's interesting that there are these little moments that I think there are just these tiny little critiques that I would have about it, just in terms of, like you said, that perhaps when you focus entirely on the visuals, and that's where it's very clear that your goals are, and that your thinking is, these other things kind of slip through a little bit, and it's kind of why does it look like this, and why are we making these decisions?
And maybe commercials and music videos, maybe you develop some habits that might not translate as well to feature films, because in a commercial, the whole point is just to get your attention. That's, so, go crazy on the visual, right? As long as it gets your attention, you're watching, it gets and keeps your attention until the end, where the brand logo is splashed onto it, or whatever the call to action is. I mean, that's the goal, right?
It's interesting that he went to school with Zack Snyder and Michael Bay, because those are two directors who also do a lot of commercial and music video, or did kind of start their career, who I also would say have very similar issues, where there's a ton of style, and sometimes it doesn't really serve the substance. It's just visual style, for the sake of visual interest. So it's kind of interesting that they, we're all classmates, because maybe they kind of bounce those ideas off each other. Who knows?
Yeah. No, I agree. And look, I just want to take a step to say this too. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's not oh my gosh, you have visuals for the sake of visuals. It's the end of the world. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, gosh, when they can really be tied in on multiple levels, I mean, I think ultimately that's the goal. Ultimately, that's what you could be trying, should be trying to shoot for. I get it. It doesn't, it always, and look, it's just such a plethora of compromise when you're making a film. You're so limited on budget, so limited on time, so limited on, everything is limited. And sometimes you've got to do what you got to do. So I totally get that too. These are made in the real world. They aren't made in a fantasy land with infinite resources, and so that happens as well. But yeah, I mean, overall, I would say I felt the film was effective too. I enjoyed it on, this subsequent watch, and I still felt like all of what CG is used, the production design, the costume design, everything in when we're in inside the mind, I felt like just held up extremely well. Indicative of its era, yes, indicative of its era, but held up so well. And I just want to, a couple other little things. I mean, I thought the costume design was just really outstanding in this. And I'm totally not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, but is it Iko Ishioka? Probably pronounced that incorrect, but she kind of that's the costume designer on this film. She had come from like a commercial graphic art design background. I think before this had done some costume work for theater and actually maybe even for the circus. But I don't think, I'm not positive, but I don't think she had done costume work for film. But I feel like her approach to these costumes are just outstanding when we're in inside the mind is kind of what I keep calling it. But when we're in that world, I mean, these costumes are so striking. They're just extraordinary. Yeah. Outstanding work, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I sort of mentioned this in the intro, but that like this is very much again at the time when CG wasn't photorealistic, so it was used so much more as a special effect. In the literal sense of that word, like where it is, and it's like really
magical.
It's an interesting, like it's I like that. Like I think that even though the CG is not photorealistic, it adds this really, really kind of fantastical feel to a lot of the visuals that, and it's blended well. It's utilized really, really well. I think, despite not being technically perfect, I think that it really does look good. In this film, and it's used really, really tastefully.
Yeah, I mean, even just near the end of the film when Jennifer Lopez, her character, is basically it's kind of like this cross between like a baptism and like a mercy killing. Near the very end of the film, and you kind of have this close up on her face, and that she's talking to, and it's cross cut with Vincent's face, his character, and you have this like blooming around the frame as they speak, and really the frame, it's just their faces. We're in close up, and you have this blooming of this like golden vines with like blossoming flowers that are they come out of this. It's computer animation. Framing them literally like you would have a painting in a frame. It's like literally
it looks like a photo frame.
It looks like a photo frame, and it was I was so fascinated by that. But it's something that I mean, I don't know that I'd ever seen that in a film before. But I guess it speaks though to your point where the computer graphics, and it doesn't look real. It looks animated, but that's where they were at with the technology. But they really utilized it. It worked really well with what they with everything in the film,
and you buy into it because of the style of the film generally.
It's so heightened, right? It's so stylized. It's so heightened, so stylized.
Yeah, that sort of thing reminded me a lot of. Now, Tarsem Singh never worked in the Indian film industry, but
I don't think.
But he grew up there, so it's very clear. Like naturally, you're going to be influenced by
some
the things
exposure.
That you watched as a kid, and that reminded me those moments especially reminded me a lot of. Some of my, like, even just S.S. Ramajouli, who did RRR a few years ago, but he also has these really great movies that he did. Like, I love his movies, and they're always very similar, where it's like using CG as a special effect that doesn't necessarily look real, and you frame like it looks
the point
sort
is
of
not
like almost like
look
Bollywood
real.
Music video in a sense.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I saw a lot of that influence kind of came through very, very clearly for me. Even just again in the performances, that there's a certain, like, with maybe the exception of Vince Vaughn, because like you said, he's just kind of being Vince Vaughn. I would say Jennifer Lopez and Vincent D'Onofrio are actually both really serve their characters really well, and they're both heightened in a very fun way, in this kind of melodramatic way. The child actor that plays the young boy, I think is really good too. So I think that there's this very very heightened melodramatic sheen on it that I think really, really works for especially those dream sequences. I think they are done really well. The music also, just to briefly touch on that.
Oh yeah, we hadn't talked about Howard Shore.
It's interesting that Howard Shore did this because he, of course, did Silence of the Lambs. He did Seven, all of Cronenberg's movies as well. And so it's funny that, he was just, I guess, kind of like the serial killer movie guy to get in the late 90s and early 2000s.
But it fits so well. I mean, because you think about where Cronenberg is going with so many of his films, right? Mm-hmm. And so much of his film is about, kind of distortion and perversion and
body horror,
body horror and that kind of dark side of things, and which this film, of course, leans into. But then you're right. Then you also have Seven and Silence of the Lambs, and we've already talked about how the other half of this film feels like very tied into that genre or that kind of trend that was going on in film at the time. And then, right after this, then you have Lord of the Rings, right?
Which is, it's like a bridge. This is almost a bridge from those two things, right? Because it's like there's this fantasy element. It begins with her riding a horse through the desert, and it feels very grand and fantastical. And then there's also this serial killer
epicness. Yeah, no, that's so interesting. You're right, because there is very much the epic side of this. And then, of course, he's a fellow... Is Torontonian? Is that such a thing?
Yes.
Is that that's what you guys use all the time, right? You like, hey, fellow Torontonian, what's going on?
No, Torontonians is that is what we are called.
It is
for real. Yeah.
What? Oh my gosh! I thought I was totally you know what? That's awesome. I just want to use.
What is it for L.A.? Los Angelesian or something? I should know because I have family there. That is exactly it. The Los Angelonian. That's exactly what we say. Okay. Yeah,
we wave to each other and say, "Hey, fellow Los Angelonian," and then they say, "No, I'm a Torontonian." Gosh,
greeting.
Like,
then they do the "Live long and prosper" Spock thing.
Oh my! All right. Well, maybe that means that we should wrap it up. We're getting punch drunk here. But man, I'm so glad that we finally got to sit down and do another one of these after a long break. But I look forward to the next one. I'll be curious to see what you pick. And it was interesting. I didn't know what to expect when I picked this. I didn't know if it would be a film that you would just say, this is garbage. Not that you ever really have ever said this is just garbage. I knew it would be more interesting than that. But I didn't know if this would be a film that you'd have any interest in or that you would think was, that you would enjoy. So it was kind of curious to see your response. And I think because it comes from it was released about when you were born, right?
2 years after I was born. I would have been 2 years old when this came out.
This is like the state of cinema near your birth. So I was curious how nostalgic that would or wouldn't be. And it sounds like it was actually quite nostalgic. So that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, everyone, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we will catch you on the flip side.
Yes. Bye-bye.